The book of Isaiah, chapter 10, verse 1 in the AMP. Woe, judgment is coming to those judges who issue evil statutes and to those who constantly record unjust and oppressive decisions.
What happens if the government issues digital currency? Like, what does that mean?
Well, digital currency is, right, you're talking about central bank digital currencies.
Yeah.
Okay, and that there's a great deal of appeal because of the fact that it's easy and so on. But it's, and I think it'll be done. A lot happens.
Do you think it will be done?
Yeah, I think it's, but what happens in the digital currency, of course, it's easy to transact and so on, almost, and it'll be like money market funds, I think. The question will be first, will they be able to offer interest? So there's a debate now as to whether they will be interest. If they're not able to offer interest, and there will be a debate, probably they won't be, but then they're not an effective vehicle to hold it in because you have the depreciation.
Of course.
You'd rather hold it in a money market fund or a bond, but that's debate. There will be no privacy, and it's a very effective controlling mechanism by the government. What I mean is all the transactions will be known. All transactions done with digital currencies will be known, which is good for illegal activities, getting control of illegal activities, but it also means that the government has a great deal of control. For example, they can tax that way. They can take your money. They can establish foreign exchange controls and the like. And that'll, so that's something that will be an increasing issue, particularly for international holders of that currency, because they might feel, let's say, if you're a Frenchman and they wanted to have sanctions, they could take your money, you know, and so on. So there's the privacy issue of that.
And if you're politically disfavored, you could be shut off.
Politically disfavored, you could be shut off, yes.
Game over. No, seriously, game over. Because apparently this war that we're watching, yeah, it's really not about oil. It's not really about geopolitics. It's not even about winning. It might be about replacing your money. You know, that green little thing called the US dollar in your pocket? Yeah, the one that you're working for, saving, maybe stressing over. Yeah, that one might be quietly getting escorted out the back door while everyone's distracted watching missiles fly on TV. Because while Donald J. Trump is out here basically saying, hey, Iran, we can turn your entire power grid into a fireworks show by tomorrow, the markets are over here having a full-blown panic attack.
Unfortunately, there's a long history of regional Middle East conflicts, and the markets need to adapt to that. So that means there's a lot of historical precedent for how markets do digest these events. Now, what we can basically say is that such conflicts tend not to end a bull market in stocks. In fact, it's almost never happened. In fact, in 1990 and 2003, the outbreak of hostilities between the U.S. and Iraq actually triggered an end of a bear market and the beginning of an upturn. That being said, usually there is a reflex pullback in the markets. Usually it's brief and shallow. Maybe it lasts a few days or a week, and it's almost entirely dependent in the short term on how much oil prices go up. The transmission mechanism between turmoil in the Middle East and the U.S. economy and financial markets tends to be the oil price.
What we've heard from oil industry executives and analysts is that we're in a narrow and closing window to stop the damage from the war in Iran from getting significantly worse. Sometime in early to mid-April, a number of stopgap measures that the U.S. and others have put in place will simply run out.
Countries that don't have the fuel already in the process of rationing it, and the rest of us are going to have to get there very soon.
Stocks are dropping, oil spiking, Bitcoin doing whatever Bitcoin does when it gets emotionally unstable. Yeah, and right in the middle of all of this, the Strait of Hormuz, aka the world's don't touch this or everything breaks button, suddenly becomes the world's most important place on Earth. Totally normal. Nothing to see here, folks. Meanwhile, the same people who told you that inflation was transitory are back again, looking at you, Federal Reserve and Jerome Powell, probably warming up the money printer like it's a 2008 reunion tour. And of course, you've got Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum, who have been saying for years, hey guys, every crisis is a great opportunity to reset everything. Oh, good. Fantastic. Love that for us, right? And just by coincidence, pure coincidence, I'm sure, you got companies like BlackRock and Tether building the financial plumbing for a whole new system while all of this chaos unfolds. But yeah, I'm sure it's just about oil. Sure. So the real question is, are we watching a war, or are we watching the dollar get quietly replaced while everyone's just too busy arguing on social media?
First and foremost, all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Rakah Kwadash. Double honor to the apostles and bishops of Great Millstone, and Shalom to the 144,000 arrested or elect. And so we have some big breaking news here. As of April 2026, the Trump administration is advancing a prospective executive order directing banks to collect citizenship data for new and existing accounts to address immigration. And basically this seems like it's in combination or an addition onto a previous executive order from March 2025, separately Executive Order 14247, Modernizing Payments, March 2025, is fully digitizing federal payments, while an August 2025 order ensures quote-unquote fair banking. So this move is a major step towards the digital ID, digital economy, which is also called the Great Reset by the World Economic Forum, or Agenda 2030, all right, where they're going to basically issue a central bank digital currency in the whole world. And the reason why they're doing that is because eventually they want to administer or make mandatory the mark of the beast, which according to the Bible is the RFID microchip implant. That's going to be the ultimate unrighteous decree and grievousness that they're going to prescribe through legislation. Let's read the book of Isaiah chapter 10 verse 1 again. Woe unto them that decree, this is in the KJV, woe unto them that decree unrighteous decrees and that write grievousness which they have prescribed. So who is that that's doing that? The so-called white man, Esau, Edom. Those that are in power, those that have the power to write laws, to pass laws, right, to come up with these executive orders, which essentially is the wicked that the Bible speaks of, Job 9:24. The earth is given into the hand of the wicked. You deal with that word hand in the Hebrew is yad, which means power. Who's the one that's been given the power over the earth to make all these laws, to create all these large organizations that basically control the world? Because see, it's not just America. This is happening in Mexico, Australia, in Europe, all over the world, in Russia. This global digital financial system, or this new world order, is being set up, is being implemented in all the world. All right, all nations, all countries are adopting this system. But who's the ones that's sitting at the top? Who's the ones that said, give me power over a nation's currency or economy, in many words, and I don't care who makes the laws? The Rothschilds said that. The banking families, those that are at the top, the elites of the Edomites, they're the ones who's ultimately putting out these decrees. And, it goes down through the chain of command, all right, to the lower ranks till it reaches the people. And just like it says in the AMP, these are unjust and oppressive decisions that they're making to oppress the people, especially you Israelites, man. Because when they talk about immigrants, who's the face that they put as these illegal immigrants, these aliens? They put the tribesmen, especially of the so-called Hispanic and South American, which is the tribes of the Northern Kingdom. They never talk about the illegal immigrants amongst some heathen nations like Elam, like Moab and Ammon, and even other Edomites that come from different European countries that they here illegally. They never talk about that. And that's because the system of the so-called white man and the heathen nations is to oppress you Jakes. It's to make sure that you never rise up and rebel or resist against this new world order. Because these heathen nations, they're not going to resist this. They all down for this whole system, the CBDC. They have no problem with the digital ID. They know that it's you Israelites, you so-called blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans. You're the ones that's going to have the problems with taking a chip in your body. You're the ones that's going to have a problem with this devil spying on you and constantly oppressing you. And ultimately, it's because you're the righteous that the Bible speaks of. You're God's chosen people, all right, the people of Yahweh Bashim Yahushai. And even though 2/3 of our people are wicked, all right, and they indulging in sin and all type of witchcraft and wickedness, and at any time, if an Israelite repents back to the name of Yahweh Bashim Yahushai and his true identity, and the Lord is dealing with him, that's going to end up being a stumbling block onto their new world order that they're not going to be able to hurdle over. Because ultimately, Yahweh Bashim Yahushai, he's dealing with his elect, all right, the elect of the nation of Israel. And through the elect, what does the scripture say? Strongholds are being pulled down. The truth is being exposed. All right, we blowing the trumpet on this whole new world order. We giving warning onto you Israelites, telling you, don't take the chip. All right, don't consent onto this new world order. To some degree, yeah, with the digital ID and with this new banking executive order, we're going to have to do that. All right, if you want to keep your job and keep getting your direct deposits and keep, your source of income coming in, yeah, you're going to have to do it. There's really no sin necessarily with the digital ID, biometric identity and all that, providing your passport. But we know that the implications of this and where it's going, where it's heading to, that's where the wickedness lies. All right, the depths of the wickedness of the so-called white man. When you read Psalm, the 64th chapter, it lets you know that. All right, he searches out iniquity. He does a diligent search. They have these things deliberately planned out. The crises, the so-called false flags, the Black Swan event, order abkeo, never let a good crisis go to waste. We're not ignorant of Satan's devices, his evil schemes. It's clear as day what he's doing. It's clear as day the agenda that he's bringing forth, and what one thing it leads to the next. Like we say here at Great Millstone, through the spirit and power of Yahweh Bashim Yahushai, all roads lead to the RFID microchip implant, the mark of the beast. So we know that that's his ultimate agenda. We know that's his ultimate goal, is to chip everybody. And as we seeing this thing develop, we're going to keep reporting on it. We're going to keep making videos, bringing out the scriptures, and Lord willing, edifying the elect. And just like it says in Ezekiel 3:17, we give you warning from Yahweh by Shai. Isaiah 42:9 as well. The Lord said, before these things spring forth, he's going to tell you of them. How does the Lord speak? Hebrews 1:1, excuse me. Through the mouth of the prophets, man, the holy prophets. So the apostle John had the vision on the island of Patmos, Revelation the 13th chapter. Let's get it. Dealing with this mark of the beast, dealing with this RFID microchip implant, and how this devil, he's setting up this global new world order system, this oppressive digital prison. And truthfully, outside of these scriptures and outside of the protection of Yahweh by Shai, there's really no escape from this. This time is also known as the hour of temptation. Why is that? Because it's going to be impossible to buy and sell. It's going to be impossible to live in this man's world, which he's controlling the whole world. This is his world, Esau, Edom's world. It's going to be impossible to do anything without consenting onto his system and taking that chip. So being that we already know that, and we know the judgment that comes with taking the chip, it's a no-brainer to basically say fuck you to the so-called white man and not take his chip. The tempting part is going to be when you can't eat, when you can't buy and sell, you can't pay your bills, which essentially means you're going to be homeless. That's what's going to make this thing tempting, and that's when our faith in Yahweh Bashim Shai is going to be required at a maximum level to endure that time, to trust in the Lord to make a way for us to escape. 1 Corinthians, the 10th chapter, the 13th verse. This is Revelation 13:16, and he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads. When you deal with that word causeth, let's get it real quick in the Greek.
Strong's G 4160, poieo.
All right, which basically means what? To make, with the names of things made, to produce, construct, form, fashion, to be the authors. We just read that in Isaiah 10:1. They're the authors of these unrighteous decrees. They're the ones prescribing them. They're the ones that are constantly, how did it say in the AMP? Got to go back real quick. Who constantly record unjust and oppressive decisions. So who is doing that? The so-called white man, the one that's in power, which is ultimately the elite. But the elite have everybody under their control through this banking system, through this usury-based, interest-based debt economy, this fiat economy. This is how he's ultimately amassed his power in the earth and has all these nations by the balls. He got all these countries in the world in a chokehold because they all in debt to him. And this is ultimately how he's going to bring forth this prophecy right here, this decree. He causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond. So all citizens, all class of citizens. It doesn't matter your so-called citizenship rights, because this is going to be a global thing anyways. All right, they're just using this illegal immigration issue to further this agenda. That's all it is. How could anybody be an illegal immigrant if he's setting up this system in all nations that no matter where you at, you're going to have to take a digital ID. You're going to have to take the RFID microchip implant. It's a one world order, a one world economy. So how could anybody be so-called illegal out of that? The only way is by not consenting to it, not going for the digital ID, not going for the RFID microchip implant and allowing them to put that in your body. That's ultimately what's going to be deemed illegal. People that's speaking up against this new world order system and resisting it and not consenting onto it. It says to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads. That word mark in the Hebrew, once again, karagma, which means an imprinted mark, an incision. And it also says metaphorically, like the mark that's branded upon horses. So we know that this is a mark of ownership. They basically saying they own you and you will be a perpetual slave onto the banking elite and their new world order. That's really what this whole thing is all about. A way for the bankers to maintain their power, to enslave everybody and have perpetual control over the planet Earth and its resources forever. Remember Psalms, the 49th chapter, the 11th verse. In their heart or in their mind, they basically intend to rule forever. I'm roughly paraphrasing it. All right, that their houses shall continue forever. So essentially, this system is going to keep them in power because as they're tracking and tracing everything, they're monitoring everything, they're in control of everything, all the spending, all the finances. They're ultimately going to stay in power forever, at least into their own carnal minds, because they don't have a spiritual mind to understand the will of Yahweh Bashim Shai and Bible prophecy, that this thing is not going to work, that the Most High is going to upset their new world order. And like it tells you in Job 5:12, their hands cannot perform their enterprise. The Most High is going to upset this new world order by a series of plagues, just like ancient Egypt, and ultimately divine judgment from Yahweh by Shemel, which is going to be that third world war, nuclear destruction. That's how Esau's world is going to end. All right, 2nd Esdras 6 and 9. Esau's the end of the world. When you deal with that word world in the Greek, it's eon, which means a time period or unbroken age of rulership. Well, it's going to be broken. It's going to be ended by the third woe. All right, thermonuclear destruction, in which America, Babylon the Great, is going to be completely and utterly desolated in this war to never be inhabited again. But not straying too far from the point, all right, they're going to implement this RFID chip, a mark in your right hand or your forehead, meaning that rice grain chip in your hand or anywhere in your body. But when the Apostle John saw his vision, you know, people were taking it in their hand and in their brain, all right, forehead meaning metapon, and that's basically your Neuralink, your Synchron chip, the BCI, the brain computer interface, which is basically trending right now in 2026. All right, you got mass amount of people's lining up to get that BCI. You got people walking around with it right now. It's being promoted, Mr. Beast, different celebrities. It's basically becoming a new technological trend, just like we told you through the Spirit at Great Millstone. We told you that they was going to make it trendy. It was going to be popular. Eventually, it would be voluntary. And then ultimately, it's going to be made mandatory through law. And once again, the only reason we know that is because it's in the scriptures. And through the Spirit and power of Yahweh Shemel, the Lord, through his Holy Spirit, have given us the understanding of these prophecies. He's given us the understanding of the visions, Habakkuk 2 and 3. And we can see that what is speaking is not lying in these last days. What other Hebrew Israelite camp is talking about that? Let's continue reading verse 17. And that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. So this prophecy has to deal with the economy. Why you think we constantly watching what's going on in the economic world? The digitalization of the global economy, CBDC, digital ID. How recently, I believe I mentioned it, I don't know, it was in another country, I think it was in Mexico or somewhere else, that a whole bunch of people's accounts just got shut down because they didn't want to basically give the bank their biometric credentials. And so the banks just started closing people's accounts down. I think this was happening in multiple parts of the world, if I'm not mistaken. This was just a few months ago. So that's what's getting ready to happen here in America, Babylon the Great. And then eventually that's going to lead to that biometric ID, that digital economy, that universal basic income, UBI. And you should be able to see how all these things are coming together through this war with Iran, how that's basically destroying the economy. It's all been planned out, man. It's all happening simultaneously. All right, once some food shortages start hitting and the shortages of all goods start hitting, they're going to have to start rationing things. How they going to ration it? Through a digital system, through having a digital ID, programmable money, where they basically could tell you what you can and can't spend that money on. They can block transactions if you're trying to buy something that they deem you're not supposed to buy. All right, it's all making sense. This is the perfect crisis to bring about this new system, man. And I believe through the Spirit they will. I believe it's going to happen towards the ending of this year. They're saying even this summer is going to be crazy with the shortages of things. Things is going to become unaffordable. Things is going to become unaffordable. All right, hyperinflation or inflation leading to hyperinflation. All right, the black horse that the scriptures speak about, Revelation, the 6th chapter. So yeah, just like the Apostle Paul said, man, we could see this thing clearly. All right, we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. We seeing the prophecy right now speaking. We getting the understanding in these last days through the Holy Spirit as what we're seeing in the news and what we're seeing taking place in the world. That's actually what the prophets saw in their visions, man. So we definitely in these times, man. We're definitely at the end of the so-called white man's world. All right, because as we know, when he's about to fill his belly, that's when the Most High is going to cast the fury of his wrath upon him and take him out. And these devils know that their time is up. All right, you got this dude, BB. He just announced that he got colon cancer. And he was saying he didn't want to announce that earlier because of the war and all that. These devils are almost out of there, man. Look at how Trump's health is declining. All right, this dude basically is the dementia patient. And his physical health as well. He got some type of infection. They said that he be stinking the room up. And you can't forget about these old wretched banking elite. All right, them Rothschilds and them Rockefellers, old ass grimy looking devils, man. How much time you think these devils got before they just croak over and die? And you don't think they know that? They're not immortal. They're just but men. And they're wicked men at that. So, hey, man, at the end of the day, the Lord is having his way. All right, he's the puppet master. This is his movie. This is his theater. All right, going back to theos in the Greek, which is where you get the word God from. These people are not gods, all right? And they don't have no true control or power. Everything's being sanctioned to them by Yahweh, by Yahawashi. And now the Lord is getting ready to take it all away, all right? So with that, I'm going to say, Kol Haloyim, La Yahweh, by Yahawashi, by Asher Makak Wadash. I hope and pray that the sincere, hopeful elect was edified through the Holy Spirit. And Shalom till next time.